Nuking Houston. Independence Day's military leadership decided the right answer to an indestructible shielded saucer was to detonate a nuclear warhead directly on top of an evacuated American city, and then act surprised when it accomplished nothing. Roland Emmerich's Independence Day hit theaters in July of 1996 on a budget of about $75 million. Within the opening act, the United States has already burned through its conventional playbook. Black Knight Squadron's strikes at Knoxville bounce off the city destroyer's force field, and President Whitmore signs off on a nuclear strike against the saucer over Houston on the recommendation of Defense Secretary Albert Nimzicki. Houston is evacuated, which the film treats as the responsible move, except the saucer's shield neutralizes the blast, and the city below is the only thing that gets vaporized. Nothing in the briefing scene establishes any intelligence suggesting the shield would fail, which means the strategy is a coin flip, with a major American city as the stake. Russell Casey later proves the same shielded saucer can be destroyed by a kamikaze run into its primary weapon, a tactic that was available the entire time without leveling Texas. The actual winning plan doesn't come from the Pentagon. It comes from a cable repairman, David Levinson, who writes a computer virus and rides the captured Roswell craft into the mothership with Captain Stephen Hiller. Nimzicki gets removed from his post after the Houston call, which is the film's quiet admission that the strike was a strategic disaster. According to Spy Culture's reporting on the film's military liaison, Pentagon consultants pushed back hardest on the nuclear sequence, arguing that real release authority would never approve a strike on American soil that quickly. The film disagreed. Klendathu Drop. Starship Troopers opens its main offensive by dropping unarmored infantry onto the surface of a planet controlled by giant insects, with no air cover, no artillery prep, and apparently no plan beyond shooting at things. Paul Verhoeven's Starship Troopers premiered in November of 1997 on a budget of about $105 million, and the Battle of Klendathu is the centerpiece. The Federation's mobile infantry deploys without orbital bombardment, without armor support, and without any coordinated landing zone, just troopers pouring out of dropships into open desert. The franchise wiki tracking the film's depiction has the operation costing roughly 100,000 troopers in the first hour, and the federal network broadcasts that follow are blunt about the result. Sky Marshal Dienz resigns on camera and is replaced by Sky Marshal Tehat Maru, whose corrective strategy works because it's the basic combined arms doctrine the first plan ignored, isolating outlying planets and bombing from altitude before infantry touches the ground. Verhoeven has said in multiple interviews that the propaganda framing is satire and the dumb strategy is the point, with the federal network announcers acting as unreliable narrators. The survivors include Rico, Dizzy, and Ace, all promoted through attrition rather than performance. The Federation absolutely meant the plan in-universe, and the slaughter is treated as a recruiting setback rather than a war crime. Independence Day Resurgence. Trap. 2 decades after winning the first war by exploiting a single mothership weakness, Earth Space Defense walks straight into the same trap with the sequel's Queen. Independence Day Resurgence landed in June of 2016 on a budget of about $165 million, and the alien Queen makes her entrance by dropping a 3,000-mile-wide harvester into the Atlantic. ESD identifies that killing the Queen will collapse the swarm, which is a reasonable thesis, but the execution is a single concentrated airstrike directly into the Queen's chamber inside the mothership. Captain Dylan Dubrow Hiller leads the wing-in with no diversion and no exfil plan, and the chamber is exactly the trap it looks like. The Queen's defenses wipe out nearly the entire unit in one engagement, and the film never explains why Earth's 20-year-old hybrid technology, assumed an obvious lure, was an actual weakness. The Queen is ultimately killed by a school bus, a stolen alien fighter, and the original film's 1996 survivors, not by the planned strike. ESD's moon base. And orbital defenses were also destroyed in the Queen's opening move, which suggests the strategy never accounted for being outranged. Skyline nuclear bait. Skyline tries to end its alien invasion with a single nuclear strike, then watches the mothership repair itself on camera, as the missile becomes the dumbest exposition the genre has ever filmed. The Strauss brothers released Skyline in November of 2010, on a budget reported anywhere from $10 to $20 million, and the US response in the film is one missile. After conventional airstrikes fail over downtown Los Angeles, the Air Force fires a nuclear warhead that scores a direct hit. The ship breaks apart for a few seconds, then it visibly reassembles itself while the camera holds on the regrowth, which is the moment the script confesses it has no follow-up. The aliens are hunting humans for their brains as a power source, which means every conventional doctrine optimized for territory holding is irrelevant. The film ends with global cities in ruins, which is the script's way of telling you every other military on Earth tried the same approach. By the way, if you're enjoying the breakdown so far, I post sci-fi deep dives like this regularly, and subscribing would help out a lot. Thanks. Signs Door Strategy. Signs presents an alien invasion of a planet that's 71% water, by a species that screams when touched by water, and never once shows a coordinated human counterattack. M. Night Shyamalan's Signs arrived in August of 2002 on a budget of about $72 million, and the central tactical problem is the invaders, not the defenders. The aliens are vulnerable to water. Meryl defeats one in the closing act with a baseball bat and a glass that Bo left on the table. There's no organized military or law enforcement response anywhere in the film beyond television clips of arrests and panicked crowds. Critics, including Slash Film and Screen Rant, have cataloged the planning failure, that a species which can't tolerate water selecting a water-covered planet for invasion is a tactical decision with no in-film explanation. Screen Rant has also covered a competing reading that the creatures aren't aliens at all but demons, which would sidestep the planning problem entirely. Edge of Tomorrow Beach. Edge of Tomorrow stages its alien war as a literal repeat of Operation Overlord on a beach in France, against an enemy that already knows the plan because its hive mind has lived the loop. Doug Liman's Edge of Tomorrow opened in June of 2014 on a budget of about $178 million, and the United Defense Forces Operation Downfall is explicitly modeled on the World War II Normandy landings. Mech suit infantry hits a French beach in waves, and the mimic hive intelligence, the Omega, is established as resetting time and learning every iteration. Dr. Carter explains on screen that the previous battle at Verdun was a victory the Omega allowed in order to lure humanity into committing everything to the beach. Major William Cage, played by Tom Cruise, is dropped in with no combat training, with an unfamiliar mech, with a safety still engaged, which is the UDF's idea of an officer rotation. The actual winning strategy, finding and killing the Omega beneath the Louvre, gets improvised by two soldiers using stolen equipment rather than by the UDF chain of command. Rita Vertasky, the Angel of Verdun, is the only character who recognized the trap, and her warnings are ignored until the loop forces command to listen. Battle Los Angeles radios. Battle Los Angeles spends an entire act discovering, the hard way, that the alien drones target radio signals, and then keeps using radios anyway. Jonathan Liebsman's film hit theaters in March of 2011, on a budget of about $70 million, and the plot follows 1st Platoon, Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, deploying out of Camp Pendleton to a forward operating base at Santa Monica Airport. The Marines lose multiple personnel, including Corporal Kearns, when alien drones home in on individual radio transmissions. The platoon's eventual win, guiding a missile to the alien command and control center, only happens after Lieutenant Martinez deliberately turns on his own radio as live bait and detonates explosives to take a drone with him. The Air Force separately scheduled a carpet bombing of Santa Monica before confirming the bombing would actually penetrate the alien staging area. Pacific Rim Wall. Pacific Rim answers giant monsters climbing out of an ocean rift by retiring the giant robots that actually work and replacing them with a wall. Guillermo del Toro's Pacific Rim landed in July of 2013 on a budget of about $190 million, and the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps initially fields Jaegers, large piloted mechs, because nuclear weapons inflict too much environmental damage on Pacific Rim cities. Following political backlash and the loss of multiple Jaegers, the governments authorized the Wall of Life Coastal Defense Project, and within minutes of the film introducing it, a Category 4 kaiju named Mutavore breaches the Sydney Wall in about an hour of on-screen time. The wall is a political decision, not a tactical one. Stacker Pentecost's Jaeger program is being defunded in favor of construction contracts, and the script makes that subtext explicit. The final winning strategy returns to Jaegers carrying nuclear payloads, the exact combination the program had previously rejected. Del Toro has said in multiple interviews that the wall sequence was added specifically to make the politicians look as bad as the kaiju. The Avengers Nuke. The Avengers has its World Security Council watch the Battle of New York for less than an hour before deciding the answer is a nuclear strike on Manhattan. Joss Whedon's film opened in May of 2012 on a budget of about $220 million, and the Council's nuclear authorization arrives well under an hour after the Chitauri portal opens above Stark Tower. Nick Fury refuses the order. The Council launches a missile anyway, through another agent. And Tony Stark is the only reason it doesn't detonate over Manhattan, because he carries it through the portal into the Chitauri fleet. The successful strategy, closing the portal, only becomes available because Eric Selvig recognizes that Loki's scepter can deactivate the Tesseract barrier. The Council was willing to incinerate roughly 1.5 million New York civilians as a first resort answer to a hostile force that had been on Earth for less than a day. Day the Earth Stood Still capture. The 2008 remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still answers a peaceful first contact attempt by surrounding the messenger with rifles in Central Park and shooting him in the chest. Scott Derrickson's remake premiered in December of 2008 on a budget of about $80 million, with Keanu Reeves as Klaatu. Klaatu emerges from a glowing sphere and is immediately surrounded by U.S. soldiers, and a confused trooper fires on him within seconds of his exit from the placenta-like suit, before any contact attempt. The defense robot Gort responds by emitting an EMP that disables all electronics in New York, which is the film's polite reminder that the shooter was a strategic decision. The Secretary of Defense, played by Kathy Bates, then orders Klaatu held for interrogation, rather than permitting his stated meeting with the United Nations. Klaatu had identified himself as a representative of an alien council sent to evaluate humanity, which means the capture order is also the evaluation. Helen Benson, played by Jennifer Connelly, smuggles Klaatu out of military custody, and the film ends with Klaatu deciding humanity might still be salvageable, specifically because the military strategy didn't represent humanity. Every other film on this list has aliens already shooting first. This one has the military shoot first and earn the invasion that follows. Mars Attacks Handshake. Mars Attacks opens its diplomatic meeting in the Nevada desert by handing a Martian delegation a peace dove and a microphone, both of which are immediately weaponized against the entire welcoming committee. Tim Burton's Mars Attacks arrived in December of 1996 on a budget of about $70 million, and the diplomatic premise is set up by Professor Donald Kessler, who convinces President James Dale, played by Jack Nicholson, but the Martians' mission is peaceful. At the welcoming ceremony, a released dove triggers the Martians to open fire on live television, killing the U.S. delegation in front of every camera in the country. A later address to Congress by the Martian ambassador concludes with the slaughter of the entire United States Congress. Even after both incidents, Kessler argues that the dove and the microphone must have been misinterpreted and arranges a second face-to-face meeting. Battleship Buoy Grid. Battleship finds its navy trapped inside an alien force field around Hawaii, loses its targeting systems, and decides the answer is to fire blind into the ocean, using tsunami buoy data like a literal grid from the board game. Peter Berg's Battleship opened in May of 2012 on a budget of about $220 million, and 5 alien spacecraft arrive during the RIMPAC exercise off Hawaii. The aliens erect a hemispheric force field that traps the U.S. Pacific Fleet inside, and onboard radar is jammed, leaving Lieutenant Alex Hopper aboard the destroyer USS John Paul Jones with no way to acquire targets. The Navy's solution is to use Japanese NOAA tsunami buoys as an external sensor grid, calling target coordinates from buoy displacement and firing into water, recreating the Hasbro board game on screen, hit or miss. Multiple shots miss before a hit reveals the alien ship's positions. The film escalates by having the survivors recommission the decommissioned USS Missouri, a museum ship, and fight the mothership with World War II-era 16-inch guns. Director Peter Berg has acknowledged in interviews that the buoy sequence was specifically engineered to recreate the board game's hit-or-miss mechanic on screen. Pentagon War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds 2005 spends its entire runtime watching the U.S. military do nothing right against a fleet of buried tripods, and then ends with the wrong species winning a war the Pentagon was never positioned to fight. Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds landed in June of 2005 on a budget of about $132 million, and the tripods are revealed to have been buried under the Earth's surface for centuries. The alien staging happened entirely inside U.S. territory without any pre-invasion detection, which is a strategic failure that predates the film's opening shot. When the tripods emerge, the military's on-screen response is artillery and infantry attacks against shielded walking machines, with no early attempt to disable the shields directly. Tim Robbins' character explains on-screen that the tripod's shields are an electromagnetic shell that detonates incoming ordnance early, but allows humans to pass through, a vulnerability the film shows and the military never exploits. According to Spy Culture's reporting on the production's military liaison, the Pentagon requested changes to the original ending, pushing Spielberg and screenwriter David Koepp to depict the Army successfully engaging a single tripod in Boston after the shields fail naturally. Spielberg has said the film was framed as a family drama inside a disaster rather than a war film, which is also the in-universe excuse for never showing a coordinated strategy session. The actual winning condition is the tripod's lack of immunity to Earth's microbiology, which means every armed engagement was militarily irrelevant the entire time. Ray Ferrier, played by Tom Cruise, survives the film by hiding, while every armed force he encounters is annihilated trying to fight back. The military's only successful engagement is at the very end, on a Boston street, against a single failing tripod with its shield already collapsed. The film shows a military that never adapts, never coordinates, never wins, and is ultimately rescued by microbes it had nothing to do with. Every blunder in the previous 12 films is in service of an outcome, but here the Pentagon's strategy is to be ornamental until the bacteria finish the war. If you found this breakdown worth your time, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.